Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this session, Calltime Mental Health, a caring approach to substance abuse and addiction in the motion picture industry. This session is kindly sponsored by our gold sponsor, UBCP ACTRA. Thank you. My name is Manu Nelutla. I'm the Executive Director at Actsafe Safety Association, and I'm going to be the moderator for this session. Before we start this session, I would like to first acknowledge the traditional indigenous lands that we all live and gather on today. Although this meeting is online, we each still enjoy the pleasure of living within an indigenous territory. To highlight the importance of this acknowledgement, I would like to urge you, following this session, to visit the Native Land digital website and search the territory on which you are located. That website is www.native-land.ca. I would ask that everyone please mute themselves in Remo before the session begins, so that we don't have any conflict. If you have any questions that you would like to ask our speakers during the question time, please write them into the Q&A section at the bottom of your screens and not the chat box. If you see down in your Zoom screen, you will see two options, Q&A and chat. If you have any questions regarding this session to the panel, to the speakers, please do put in your questions in the Q&A section and not in the chat section. And let me remind you, you can also ask your questions anonymously too if you click for that option. So please do keep them coming. There will be some time at the end for the speakers to answer your questions. Coming back to the session, the speakers of the sessions are Greg Taylor, who is a registered clinical counselor. He leads FSEAP, an employee assistance program, and is a subject matter expert for Calltime Mental Health. Hi, Greg. He is joined by Stacey Wilson, who is the executive director of Together We Can Society. Hi, Stacey. And he's joined by their reporting counselor, Samantha Armstrong. Hi, Samantha. Welcome. They are joined by Tom Adair from Calltime Mental Health. Tom was previously executive director at BC Council of Film Unions and was also a board director at Actsafe. Welcome, Tom. And from Teamsters, Laurie Ward is here. Hi, Laurie. Laurie is also the chairperson for Calltime Mental Health, and he's also on the board of Together We Can Society. So it's my privilege to, without further delay, let me welcome you to our first speaker of this session. Tom, it's all yours.
Thank you, Manu, and it's great that people are joining us here today. Calltime Mental Health, who's sponsoring here too, and under this banner, was created in 2017 by a joint effort of 6 unions, and that was recognizing the need for a common resource for all those in need of help, and either they are looking for help or they want to help, and they work in the motion picture industry, hence Calltime Mental Health, and it is certainly our belief from what we have heard since 2017 that we have saved lives. And I think that's what the session today is about saving lives. And in the end of the day, hopefully that will be something that we're successful, and with Greg and Samantha and Stacey. So I just wanted to that's how it started, and have a look at the Calltime Mental Health website, which will be in the chat, I believe will be at some point. Easy to look up. Calltime Mental Health is a fabulous resource, easy to get to. If you're looking for help, if you want to help somebody, it's a very quick way to find some resources that can help you out. And if you're in the motion picture industry, it's a couple clicks away from directly getting into connection with your counseling services. So I wanted to pass it over to Laurie Ward, who is our noble leader for Calltime Mental Health.
Well, that's quite a handle. Thanks, Tom. It's a real privilege to be part of this today. I left something fairly significant last minute to be here, and Tom, thanks for a great introduction to Calltime Mental Health. It means a lot. Tom's now a longtime friend through work in the BC Council, and with his efforts to actually put Calltime Mental Health together, collaboratively working with Actsafe. It's just amazing the support we've gotten from Actsafe, and working with Greg with FSEAP, and of course Stacy with Together We Can. So it's a big part of my heart, and I'm here fully to support it. And the message is a very clear message. It's for Calltime Mental Health. It's mental health and addiction. They certainly are tied. And I am looking forward to learning more today, and looking forward to the questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Lori and Tom, so much for the introduction. And it truly is, just as somebody who works as a consultant to the film sector and to the film unions that have come together to form Calltime Mental Health Campaign, I just want to say, working in the mental health space across sectors, that this is really a unique initiative where it was a grassroots initiative begun by the unions who came together to say, we want to do something, that we have influence, that we have our members, and that we want to come together and really bring our synergies together into one campaign that can serve the whole BC sector, and of course, many people accessing it even beyond. So there's been hard work over the last number of years. We've done a number of events. If you haven't been to the website, on the homepage, if you scroll down, there's an amazing PSA video that is a call to action, and also to say that you're not alone if you do struggle with mental health and addictions, with people from the sector, from each of the unions, sharing a bit about their story. And so I recommend that you go there and check that out, and we'll talk about some other resources as well. And also the link to the Calltime Mental Health website is in the chat box just now, if you want to save that to check out later. And so we also, to start off today's session, wanted you to know that if you do ask questions, Q&A, that we will be getting to those towards the end, but please feel free to enter them at any time. And that when you do select the option for Q&A, you can select to be anonymous. So if you do have a personal question or related to personal concerns, you can still put those in anonymously. And the first step also is that we'd like to do 3 poll questions for you, for the group that's attending today, just to get a temperature and a kind of an awareness of the group that's attending today. And so please know that this is also confidential, being done through the Zoom platform, so answers won't be associated with anybody specific who's attending the session today. So I ask you to participate in the poll, and also to be honest in those questions. And so if we could have those poll questions come up now, perhaps we could start that way, and that could be kind of a launching pad for discussing the session today. So you'll notice there's actually 3 questions, so you can scroll down on the right-hand side of the questionnaire. First question is regarding substance use and addiction. I have current concern for, and you can select more than one answer. So do you have current concerns about substance use and addiction? And would that be for yourself? And again, you can choose more than one: a family member, close friend, a work colleague, just generally worried about substance use in your workplace or in the motion picture sector in general. Or perhaps you have no current concern, you're just interested in this topic for some good knowledge. The second question is regarding yourself. You know, what level, if just for yourself, it actually is a question to say, what level of concern, if any, do you have regarding alcohol or substance use? And so it gives a few levels of options. I'm not concerned about my personal use of alcohol or substances, so if it's not a concern to you personally. I'm questioning my alcohol or drug use levels and whether I may have a problem. I have a problem, possibly, but have not accepted or accessed help yet. And then finally, I have accessed professional help and am now or have started recovery, for those people who have either just begun or are currently in recovery for substance use. And then the last one is specifically about the last number of months in this past year. During COVID and the pandemic, my use of alcohol and or drugs has increased. And yes, no, or not sure, maybe. So if you could all participate in those questions, that would be really amazing for us to get a temperature for the sector, and also a temperature just for the group that's attending the webinar today. Okay, so we have the poll results, and from the questions that were answered, we can see that There's, for many people, that's not a current concern, about half of the group, where they're just interested. But otherwise, there are people with family or close friends, work colleagues, and 37% of people saying generally that they're worried about substance use within the workplace, or at least within the motion picture sector. And we do know that it's been a concern over the years, and highlighted by fentanyl deaths experienced within each of the unions of member deaths and people passing away. The ultimate concern with substance use. Number two, most people saying that they're not currently concerned about their own, which kind of reflects the first question, but there's a few people that are questioning about their use right now and whether it is a problem or not, which is just a healthy attitude to have, to say, I'm wondering about my use and is it an issue? And then during COVID, finally, has it increased? And about 28% said yes, a few not sure, and then the majority that said no, it hasn't increased. So I think interesting results for us to think about, and in particular about the group attending today. So thank you so much for participating in that, and for being here, and for many of you being here out of concern for somebody in your life that you're wanting to be able to support. So we'll be sure to take that angle, as well as myself, Stacy, and Samantha speak today, to talk not just about for people who are looking for help themselves that may watch this recording after today's session, but also for those of you attending today who do have concerns about colleagues, friends, and family members. And I think just to begin the session topic-wise, that it's important to talk about substance use, alcohol use, cannabis use, that it is all on a spectrum, right? It's not about demonizing any one particular behavior, but it is about saying, when it starts to become a problem, is there a way to get help and to recognize it in that moment, or as it evolves over time? And so there's a number of great graphics. You can probably find them online if you actually do a Google search. But there's things like the continuum of substance use, or the harm reduction continuum. And what those kind of address is that there's various levels of use of substances and alcohol. And so you can start with none. So some people just don't touch it at all for family, personal, religious, and other reasons. Some people just never having kind of got into it. Then there's kind of a many layered of many people that use it socially, right? So it's just when you go to dinner or have people over and there's a bottle of wine or some kind of social use. The next category they typically identify as recreational. So beyond just a glass of wine with a meal that kind of goes with the meal, it's actually we're going out to the pub, or we're going to go drinking, or we're going to have beers to watch the game. And so it's a little bit more of a part of the activity that you're engaged in. The next is kind of moderate use, which kind of is the middle ground between just kind of casual social use and a little bit more heavier use. And that can be where people find themselves just questioning, I think this is okay, but how often am I drinking and how much? But then that can easily kind of switch over or find people in the chronic use category. And that's where it's a regular part of their social network. And if not part of their social network, also partly part of their personal patterns and their personal habits, whether they be with people or home alone. And again, there doesn't have to be a judgment about drinking with friends or even drinking at home alone. It's all about the frequency, the intensity, and the impact that that drinking is having on your life and your ability to make choices and have control over it. So after chronic, there becomes compulsive. And that's where it becomes something that it's no longer just a choice. I'm feeling like having a drink today or taking a substance, but it becomes more compulsive, that to manage my day, to deal with the stress, to forget about some issues, to be able to relax, that I need the substance. And then the last stage is chaotic. And it's in that compulsive and chaotic that is really where many people end up being diagnosed with substance use disorder, where it's no longer become a choice, but it's become an ingrained pattern or an addictive habit that is formed, a compulsive use that's formed for somebody. And so you can see that people can sometimes go up and down that scale, depending on how far up to the end they go. I know in my own personal life, drinking was part of the culture around me, not a lot in my family. It was more just the social use, not recreational use. But then in my early teens, working in summer sports with people that were older than me, there were parties with alcohol, and that became a big part of my life right from 15 years on. And so for me, it was recreational, social, but kind of edged into the, the moderate and challenging piece. And when I got out of my teens, then in university, where it was even more free-flowing, then it became more chronic. And eventually, as I got into my adult life and moved away from regular social supports and had other life and work and career stresses and challenges, that for myself, I actually ended up in compulsive and chaotic use of alcohol. And the challenge for me was that when I thought about alcoholic, it meant that they looked a certain way, or they lived in a certain place or a certain area, and also possibly that it meant you drank every single day, right? Those were what I had in my head as what an alcoholic might look like. And so mine didn't look like that, but I had binge drinking events that were prolonged and serious, and were physically harming to me, and also would wreck me for a couple days. And so when those began to become more frequent, it was not just a substance abuse in the sense that sometimes we just go a little too far, but it became a regular pattern of too far. And then eventually it became that became a crutch, that became the way I coped with my negative feelings. And so there was a year's period where I got a little help and I found some support, and I thought I could cut down using my own strengths and using my own skills, to the point though where one day I finally found myself sitting in the car, realizing it was the morning after one more time. I was at risk of losing some relationships in my work, and really was at risk of damaging my health permanently as well. And so it was at that moment where a good friend who I had started to trust and tell a little bit about my challenges and struggle called me and said that they heard about an outpatient treatment program that was available, and that they had the contact information, and was I interested in their help in me connecting to that help. And so it was that person just saying, hey, you don't seem like yourself, here's some information, and can I help you connect? That was actually my step out of that cycle I had found myself in. And so I received that treatment, and it was at that time, now over 20 years ago, that I was able to break that habit and enter into a life of recovery. And so I share that now because now I head up a mental health company, I work as a counselor, but I have that history, and that's part of where my drive to help people comes from. It's from my own experience and my own struggles with addiction and mental health. So I think it's important for us, when we can, to be able to share that kind of story, to break the stigma, to say it doesn't have to look like a certain person in a certain category or in certain conditions, that it could be anybody that we know in any walk of life, vocation or sector, that is struggling with addiction and addictive patterns. And so if we can have this open conversation that says, every time we talk about drugs and alcohol, it doesn't have to be a shame event where if you confess or talk about your use, that it suddenly means that you're an addict. But it just means, how can we have conversations that give us some freedom to say, where am I on that spectrum? Where am I on that continuum of substance use and alcohol use? And not to be afraid then at some point to be able to question ourselves and say, how healthy is where I am at right now? And also to be able to have those conversations with others. And so I thought we would just start off with a bit of an introduction like that, to talk about that continuum, so that we can have a safe conversation about the use of alcohol, drugs, cannabis. And it's important for the film sector, motion picture, and television, because of the long hours and the work that you do. I know, having worked with the committee and heard stories and information and statistics from the sector, that there has been a history of substance use, both within the population and the members that work within the sector, and at some points, and particularly in the past, even on set and during productions. And so, it becomes not just a health issue for the individual, but it also becomes a safety issue for the sector and for the coworkers that you're working with. And it's not just about now whether people actually use substances while they're at work or on their break, but it's how close to the work day has somebody been using a substance in the evening or the night before their next shift. And also, what is it doing to them in terms of their capacity, their energy, their ability to focus? So even if the substance is no longer affecting them while they're actually on shift or on set, then is the physical impact and the exhaustion and the social isolation actually an impact that's still impairing them, because it's all about impairment. Being able to do our work in a safe and concise and healthy way, and being able to relate to those around us. And when substance use gets to a stage where it becomes problematic, it can really become an impairment, either an actual impairment by the drug being in our system or the alcohol being in the system, or the ripple effects of having used drugs and alcohol to an extensive extent that then affects our ability to be clear mentally and to actually be physically attuned to the work and the equipment and the people that are around us. So that's why it's important for us on our personal level, in our own lives, and those around us. And it's also a key and important issue. And in particular, when we think about Actsafe and this conference and safety on set, that it's an important issue related to how well are people when they're at work and on the set. And so, Stacey, I just thought I'd kind of hand off to you, and just having had that introduction about that spectrum, just if you could pick up from there, and also with you working at Together We Can and working in treatment and addiction treatment, maybe that next phase when it starts to move into addiction and some of the signs and symptoms and some of the information you've prepared for us today.
Certainly. You're a tough act to follow, so thanks, Greg. And thanks for the opportunity to be here today. This is not my first rodeo with Actsafe, so again, I'm honored and privileged to be able to speak. And Greg, thanks for having the courage to tell everybody about your story. And currently I am executive director of Together We Can. We are a residential treatment center for drug and alcohol abuse. That wasn't always the case for myself. So similar to Greg, I'm big about breaking down the stigma that surrounds mental health and addiction, and often that comes about by humanizing myself. Sometimes I reflect about my past and how I ended up here. Not dissimilar to Greg, my addiction and my alcoholic behavior slowly started to manifest when I was younger. Unfortunately, I came to know at an early date I had obsessive symptoms around pretty well everything I did. So despite being like a weekend warrior and whatnot, I still had a very loving upbringing. I had two wonderful parents that were both teachers. I reflect fondly on my childhood. I did, however, have the gene, if you will. There was alcoholism that did run in my family. It manifested in my grandfather, it manifested in my father, and then it also manifested in me. I was successful in a lot of my endeavors at a young age. Pretty comedian-like in school, very active in sports. I was president of Students Against Drunk Driving, yet I was one of the most chronic offenders in that regard. So I did like to hide a lot of my behaviors. I did graduate, attended UBC, lived overseas, started a lot of reasonably successful businesses. But unfortunately, I had this propensity to continually raise the bar as far as my performance was concerned. And eventually what that kind of looked like for me was the introduction of chemicals into my lifestyle. And this was predominantly due to my propensity to look at how can I work longer hours and whatnot. And unfortunately, the inevitable demise that my lifestyle looked like is I pretty well lost everything. So that was a number of successful businesses, a very loving marriage. My spiral and fall from grace was pretty severe. One thing I did learn that, addiction or alcoholism is a family disease. We harm the ones we love the most. There are many, many things that I reflect on now that I find unforgivable for myself. So not that I want to jump too far into my story, but I currently consider myself a living amend. As mentioned, I'm currently executive director, but what my life needed to look like is an absolute and total spiral into darkness. Eventually it looked like my family would have nothing to do with me. I didn't have my children in my life. I had 3 suicide attempts. I was chronically trying to outthink the disease of addiction and alcoholism, unsuccessfully, I might add. After 3 suicide attempts, I ended up in the hospital, and I reached out, and I finally decided to try to change my life as dramatically as possible. And for me, that looked like entering residential treatment. I had tried a number of other things. I had tried geographic cures. I had tried counseling. I had tried some therapies for mental health. For me, my journey looked like none of those were successful. I needed to be thoroughly and absolutely broken and consequently teachable. I entered into residential treatment and I allowed recovery to write the script. For me, that looked like relearning how to live. I had obviously no life skills. I let recovery write the script. I learned some basic things around what recovery looked like, things like 12 steps, things like getting a sponsor, things like keeping things simple. I learned to not have expectations. One of the reasons why I'm kind of trying to humanize myself, and I'm going to encourage everybody that's listening, is ask questions. Because right now, if I compare to myself to what I was to where I am, I'm somewhat unrecognizable. But my life prior to entering into recovery was absolutely filled with darkness. And if there's anything that I can do to prevent others to spiraling into that, I make myself available. So I had to make a fairly dramatic shift. And for me, that wasn't going back to what I did previously. I made a conscious decision to put my life in the service of humanity. So I ended up working menial jobs at a number of treatment centers. I learned the inner workings of these centers from the bottom up. And I was looking for something. I was looking for a facility that represented what I wanted my life to look like. And that was love and compassion and honor and integrity. And to make a somewhat long story short, I ended up at Together We Can. And when I started at Together We Can, we were a 35-bed facility. We have currently grown into the largest treatment center in Canada, currently servicing well over 300 individuals. We have a variety of different programs that service all profile demographics, whether that's extremely high functioning, I'm the smartest man on the planet, broker or lawyer, all the way to a variety of different union members, all the way to the most traumatic and vulnerable in our populace. And I guess I've also learned that relationships in life are everything. And I'm honored to say that Lori is a good friend of mine, as well as Greg. We work closely together. A lot of us are on a similar mission, and that looks like, how can we help? So currently we're kind of mired in a dual pandemic. So we not only have all the ramifications of the COVID situation, and that what that has done to us as a society, to us as individuals, to us as union members working in the motion picture industry. You add that to an ever increasing opiate epidemic, and we have a problem that by far surpasses anything that I ever seen. It has changed the game completely. So in 2020, we realized a 74% increase in mortality. So right now, what we're faced with is that recreational drug use that I started with, but obviously tumbled into something more severe and chaotic. Recreational drug use is now a recipe for death. You don't know what you're getting. We have a mortality rate of about 6 people a day here in BC. Well over 56% of those deaths occur in residences. So the common misperception that this drug epidemic is a downtown east side or a vulnerable populace issue is incorrect. So we now have severe job loss. We have a weekend warrior that wants to pick up some chemicals for whatever reason. These are the type of profiles that are unfortunately passing away. I can tell you that, as I mentioned, addiction is a family disease. Alcohol is a family disease. If you think carefully, this cuts through all profile demographics. It targets pretty well everyone. And if you think carefully, I'm sure it's touched someone that you know, whether that is a family member or someone that you work with. This is a chronic and ever increasing epidemic. Now, the stigma and the silo about it, we need to break those down, because by not talking about mental health or not talking about alcoholism or addiction, a direct result of that is people die. There are unsafe workplaces. We deal with most unions and we know what safety sensitive looks like. And quite frankly, we need safe workplaces. And as importantly, or even more importantly, this is a mortality issue that we're talking about. So one of my popular philosophies is, sure, that's the problem, but what's the solution? For me, solution is twofold. Solution for me looks like congruent behavior. I emulate recovery principles. I wake up each morning and I do the basic and simple things that have kept me clean. And by the way, one of the reasons why I love doing Actsafe, because it falls a day after my sobriety date. So yesterday I happened to celebrate 15 years sober. I celebrated with my friends and family at Together We Can. My daughter, who works here, was there. We, as opposed to having a cake, I had sushi, because that's one of my current addictions in my life. But I think all those things that I lost, and rightly so, during active addiction, have all returned to me. Because recovery's taught me that by doing the next right thing, and by putting one foot in front of the other, and not by having expectations, these precious gifts return. So that same mother that wouldn't talk to me for years, I talk to pretty well every week, and I tell her that I love her. Because I've also learned that life is fleeting. I've learned that in the industry that I've chosen to work in, there isn't a day that goes by that I don't know somebody that dies. Now that happens to be based on the fact that I know a lot of people and I've worked in the industry for a long time, but that in itself can be fairly traumatic. So back to what's the solution? For me, it's I wake up and try to help as much as I can daily. I have a formidable team and family that works behind me here at Together We Can. So when you talk solution, treatment is a solution. Counseling is a solution. Together We Can has a family program. So not only are we here to serve males and females that require residential treatment, but we have a free family program that's available to anyone. Don't even need to be in Together We Can, because addiction's a family disease. I dragged my mother and father through the mud. My father, God rest his soul, is no longer here. He passed away in my addiction. I can tell you that I pray to my dad. I know he's watching me every day. And that's one thing that I strive to be vigilant around. I want to keep and make him proud. So again, the family program that we've designed here, back to that point, it's important, because individuals that come into our care get all our wonderful services, yet the family members are left there with their disaster, with all their issues and whatnot, and they too need to heal. So when we talk about solution, I'm going to put out there that we do grief and trauma virtually, because unfortunately you may have family members or friends or people on the job site that have passed away. We need to heal and have therapy around that. So those type of services are available. Again, outpatient, inpatient. You know, we're blessed to be able to work with Calltime Mental Health as well. There are resources available out there. So as Tom and Greg and Lori have mentioned, if you're looking for help, go to Calltime. If you're looking for assistance, contact me at Together We Can. It's my own personal mission. Anyone that contacts me for help, I will help. That is what I've chosen to do as my own mission, but also that's just Together We Can's philosophy. So again, back to like COVID, some of you may have seen individuals and or yourselves that have suffered from job loss. You know, it's stressful enough living life. You add COVID onto that, and then you add the unfortunate reality of addiction and alcoholism. We have an absolute disaster on our hands. So again, if you're going to do any takeaways from this, I encourage you to ask questions. I'll certainly be available for that. But let's try to think about how do we move from problem to solution? Because ultimately, the longer we're talking about the problem, the less we're focusing on ultimately what we need, and what we need is solution. And that, again, Together We Can find those solutions. So I'll pass it back to Greg.
Thank you, Stacey. And that was great to hear more about your story again, and also about Together We Can. the amazing work that you're doing and the partnering that you do with our group and so many other groups. And Samantha, I was just thinking as you begin, just thinking about people who are here both either for themselves, and also many people in the poll mentioned that they're concerned about a friend or a family member, then maybe just starting off your section just with your thoughts about how somebody who needs help for themselves can kind of broach that topic with them own selves and the people around them, or where they can start, and also family members, and how family members can think about being a support to somebody they're worried about in their family.
Absolutely. Yeah, Stacey and everyone's mentioned it is a family disease. So if it is someone that you're recognizing that is struggling, family, friend, coworker, neighbor, dog walker, whoever's in your life, Stacey put it perfectly, is ask questions, have those conversations, and not be afraid of what their reactions are going to be. Their reactions are first not your responsibility. You ask those questions. It's a hard question to ask, and they might not like the question being asked, but it starts to get the wheels in motion in their thinking processes, and starting to recognize that, oh, someone is recognizing that I have a problem and starting to pick up on that, and they might start thinking about things a little bit differently. Reaching out to resources such as the family program, like Stacey mentioned, it is a free service. There's online chats on many services. Together We Can has an online chat. So if people are not wanting to communicate over the phone or things like that and are looking for resources and supports and who to contact, look for those chat functions on those websites. Go to Calltime Mental Health, send emails. For me personally, I'm not in recovery, but I do have significant family history. So we talk about it being a family disease, and I was that family member who watched, my brother suffer with fentanyl and overdoses that I've lost count of, and treatment stays that I've also lost count of. You need to also make sure that you're looking after yourselves. So for those of you in the poll that were talking about family or friends that you might have concerns about, make sure you're also looking after yourselves and your self-care. The constant worry that you have about them and things like that can begin to take a toll on yourself. So make sure that you're also looking after yourselves, especially if you're in an immediate family relationship with them. It could be draining. So make sure that you're also looking after yourself. People who are looking for help, the resources during COVID, during the height of COVID, they were limited with COVID outbreaks and things like that in many facilities, and resources were shut down. And then that's where we saw the spike when industries were unable to function because of COVID, and working from home and things kind of fell to the wayside. Even getting on social assistance and getting that CERB access for individuals became a nightmare when things were crashing and not going through properly. And so for now, things are starting to become a little bit more online. So if you have the access, get online. Even if you just, Calltime Mental Health has tons of resources. And if you Google and search, there's people out there in your communities. There's community resources for mental health in most communities. They have their own establishments that you are able to connect with. Local hospitals are able to help you connect with substance use facilities as well, and mental health facilities. So don't be afraid to reach out. Those services are there for a reason, and they're there to help you. And their job is to help you. So don't be afraid. I know it's challenging and hard to make that first step, but once you do, it'll be life-changing for sure. If you listen to Stacey's story or Greg's story or anyone's story, it's life-changing when you're able to make that first step, and you do not need to do it alone. Does that answer your question, Greg?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
So I'm going to talk a little bit more kind of about the continuum of care and what we can kind of do moving forward, and recognizing, Greg mentioned it earlier in his, when he was talking about how we are able to notice when it's potentially becoming a problem. So COVID definitely seen a spike in use. I know not so much in this poll, but as a general demographic and population, there has been an incredible spike. If we look at statistics from liquor stores and things along those lines, we've seen a dramatic increase in that, as well as community conversations and family member conversations and conversations with friends. Especially in industries that were closed down, and some industries are still closed down with no prospects of reopening at this time. There wasn't a lot to do but sit at home and wait to figure out what was happening. And so when we look about and think about our consumption, we want to think about how it's affecting our life. So are we going from one glass of wine a night? Are we going, and then is it gradually increasing, and all of a sudden, or one beer, and you're all of a sudden by the end of the week, a case of beer is gone? Are you stopping to do things that you normally do? Did you used to go for runs after work, and now you'd rather sit at home and have a beer instead of going for a run? Is it affecting your relationships? Are you no longer communicating with your spouse or your friends or your colleagues? Are you someone who used to be extroverted and is now introverted and really focusing more on the feelings and emotions that they have? So we really want to look at how our behaviors change when we start to think about our alcohol and substance use consumption. We might not think it's a big deal, but on the outside, to those looking in, we start to behave differently and act differently. And that's when we want to kind of watch and make sure that we're not shifting ourselves to being so focused on that drink or that substance, and neglecting your responsibilities as well. So being a weekend warrior, showing up to work on Monday morning, that's stuff can still be in your system, and you're still lagging on sleep, and you're showing up to work. You think you're doing good because you showed up to work, but there's those risk factors that still come along with it. And if that starts to become if you start doing that, or if it starts to become a regular routine thing, that's when we need to start looking at some options and having those conversations. And that's when individuals need to not be afraid to have those conversations as well, and say like, hey, you're looking a little off today. Are you okay? Or I've started to notice you're having a few more beers than you're used to having. Can we have a conversation about that? And not be intimidated by it. That helps reduce the stigma and the barriers around addiction when we aren't afraid to talk about it, when we aren't afraid to bring it to light, when we aren't afraid of reactions and things like that. So we really want to, the biggest thing I can put out there is ask questions and have a conversation. They're going to be tough conversations, but have those conversations. And when we start to get into that realm of noticing and people are saying, okay, I need help, then be there and support them and ask them, how can I help you? Is it getting online yourself and finding resources and presenting it to them? Is it sitting with them maybe while they make that tough phone call to a counseling agency or a treatment center or to their union EAP? Or is it just holding their hand or sitting there listening to them while they kind of let it out a little bit? Don't be afraid to ask them what they need, and see how you can actually walk them through it and be the support by asking, what can I do to help you? And being there with what they ask for shows that you support them and that they still have autonomy over their own life with a support system behind them, backing them. Together We Can family program. I encourage the 53 participants that are in this session right now to reach out, especially that percentage that had the concerns about family or friends or coworkers, to sign up for the family program. You learn a ton of education about it. You learn how to communicate your concerns to family and friends and coworkers. You learn, if it is a family member, how to set boundaries. When we have someone in addiction on the outside, we need to set our boundaries for our own selves. We need to be able to protect ourselves as well, our heart, our brain, our mental health, and make sure that our mental health doesn't become deteriorated and then we start to turn to substance use. We need to protect ourselves, and that's where boundaries, healthy communication Yelling and screaming ain't going to get you anywhere. So we learn how to have those healthy conversations and set those boundaries and introduce you to understand maybe what your loved one is going through. So some of us on the outside, we don't know what addiction feels like internally, mentally, physically. We are able to kind of give you an insight to what they're going through. So maybe when you are having a communication and you set those boundaries, you know how to effectively do it. We do a grief and loss component. So if you do have someone in substance misuse, you've lost a piece of that person. You've lost your friend who you used to be friends with. You've lost your son or your daughter or a parent in the relationship that you used to have while they're in their addiction. So we talk how you can work through that and process that as well. It's a great resource, and I highly encourage everyone to kind of check it out, reach out to the family program group who have those concerns for family and friends, and it's a fabulous resource. It's free, it's online, and if you can't make it, just like this webinar, we'll send it to you. So you still get all of that information. Don't be afraid to have conversations. Don't be afraid to ask. And don't be afraid to talk about substance use and mental health, because it's affected every single person one way or another. And we all have been affected by it, whether it's my brother or my father or your classmate or your coworker. It's out there, and we need to start talking about it more.
Great, Samantha. Thank you. And there's some more ways we can continue to have this conversation. One of which is we have been seeing the questions coming in from participants, and just to make sure that you know, we will be getting to those. We have dedicated the last half hour or so of the session to answering those questions. And so Samantha, Stacy, had you covered kind of the segments that you had hoped to in a formal way?
I think one come around I think I didn't touch on as well is, in addition to asking the questions and having the courage to try to break down some of those barriers, another prudent suggestion is seeking out resources that could remove barriers, because one of the problems that we find is often there's like red tape, and often people are stuck static because it seems like an insurmountable task to be able to move someone into that solution, or where do they go, or how do they do it. And I just wanted to also remind people that there is a solution to every problem that they're faced with. So whether it might manifest in the form of counseling, or one of the beautiful things about COVID is the new virtual reality. So things are a lot closer and at our fingertips. So sometimes having to take physical action and going to see someone might be insurmountable. Now you can Zoom on and access a service. And those services look like intervention services. Those services look like, family programs, as we touched on, or counseling, or there isn't, if it looks like this is unsolvable, I question you to challenge me on that. There hasn't been a problem, in my opinion, that's unsolvable via addiction that I've come across. But again, knowing what the ultimate cost is to family and individuals, and that is mortality. So again, we are all duty bound here, in my opinion, to try to do everything we can to move into solution. So just bear that in mind and know you're not alone. And that, we're a phone call, an email, a Zoom call away. By simply initiating contact, asking the question, we will remove barriers. Because as Samantha and I both touched on, COVID threw up further barriers for individuals that are looking for help. So resources became unavailable. Together We Can was one of the few treatment services that actually found a way to ride through COVID. And, initially I thought it has been a game changer. I thought, oh my goodness, what are we going to do? But again, we strive on, everybody worked harder, worked more effectively to move into solutions. So we actually added services instead of removing them. So again, I guess the point of this particular monologue is to know that you're not alone. And if you have a problem, please bring it to the forefront, and we're here to help you with solutions.
That's great, and we can probably bridge even into some of the questions, and just to finish that piece about supports and resources, just specific to the Calltime campaign, and in particular people who are part of the 6 unions that are part of that campaign from the motion picture sector, that on the Calltime mental health website, there's a looking for help section. And there's 2 options there. One is public resources that you can click, and it takes you to a whole realm of links to mental health resources. And there's a section specific to addictions that can lead you to more information, support lines, even some tutorials and short courses that you can take just to become more familiar with addiction and addiction support. And also there's the section that actually lists out each of the unions and the supports they provide to their members. And so you can find both the information about your employee and family assistance program or member assistance program there, and the phone numbers. And also many of the unions also have other extended health benefits that also extend to counseling and addiction support. And so there's a shot there of the website, and you can see that page where each of the unions is listed. And if you click there, also some of the unions actually provide some financial support to members who are seeking treatment. So there is some financial programs as well, and it varies slightly by union, so you can check those resources out there as well. And just before we get to some of the other questions, just while we're talking about Together We Can and some of your programs and resources, amazing about your family program that people can connect with. There's also the question though, asking, is Together We Can and your programs for males only?
That's a very good question. For the last many years, Together We Can was predominantly only male. It is the last year we've actually moved into treatment gender specific for females as well. So that looks like both primary treatment, which duration, the longer an individual can stay in treatment, the better, and also second stage or sober living for successful candidates post-treatment. So we both service male and female. Okay,
fantastic. And so there was a broad question just thanking us for being so open with our stories, but also wondering if we can expand a bit about the link between mental health and substance misuse and vice versa, and how they're connected. What's your experience in seeing, working with people in that connection?
So as a counselor at Together We Can, I see a big connection between the two. Often mental health will present itself as depression, anxiety, or more complicated mental health such as bipolar, schizophrenia. And in some cases, those can go untreated or manifest themselves in ways where individuals are unable to cope with the feelings that they have around it. Depression can be laying in bed and unable to cope, or anxiousness and unable to understand what's going on with their body, and turning off their brains. Often what will happen is substance misuse, alcohol, substances will become a coping mechanism. They have that glass of wine at dinner and they start to say, oh, this fixes what's going on with me. It turns off my brain. And so in some of the cases that I've seen is they start to increase that consumption because it numbs. It turns off the brain, it numbs what's going on in their body, it numbs those feelings of maybe low self-esteem, low confidence, and it manifests itself in ways where now they have the confidence. They can have those conversations. That introvert has changed to an extrovert and they like the reception that they're getting. And so we see those connections quite a bit in treatment and in our facility here. And what we do is we treat both. You can't treat one without the other. And so in our clinical practices, we want to get to the root of both of them. We want to get to the core belief system that you hold that might be driving your substance misuse. But we also want to get to the root of your mental health and make sure that you're getting the help that you need with it. Whether it's doctors and physicians and medication if needed, or if it's breaking it down into piece by piece with a counseling and clinical team who's able to help you navigate both situations and help you recognize the both situations and how they affected each other. And so mental health and substance use, for me, from what I've seen, it's hand in hand. I often don't see someone who has substance use that doesn't have a component of mental health. And so we want to make sure that you treat both and understand where both of them are coming from on an individual basis.
Great, thank you for that. And yes, that's been my experience too, that it's a bit of the chicken and the egg, right? That for some people, there are mental health challenges and the dimensions that also trigger substance use to try and kind of self-medicate their challenges. And then also the other way around, where the use of substances, of course, they have mood-altering effects. And so alcohol, for example, being a depressant, and others being stimulants, and that they can exacerbate vulnerabilities that we have in our mental health. And also, not to mention just the fact that as it becomes a problem, substance use, or we start to hide it or feel concerned and sharing it with others, then the isolation can trigger other challenges. So it can become a bit of a spiral. And I know we've talked a bit about this, but there were a couple questions again, just about how to have that first conversation with somebody without kind of feeling like you're judging them. So there's a question like, how can I be supportive to somebody who wants to get off using substances and drinking, but how can I navigate and show compassion without shutting down the lines of communication? And there was another question, what's the first step in engaging in a conversation with someone that you may have a concern about their alcohol or substance misuse?
Very, very good questions. So I think before I directly answer that one of my own personal experiences, being in recovery, one of the philosophies of being there and done that, being able to engage in conversations on an empathetic level that, again, we're blessed with having clinicians that are in recovery, clinicians that aren't in recovery. But again, when you're talking about someone that has been there, that does hasten breaking down some barriers as far as the initial conversation is concerned. But if you don't have the luxury of an asset in that regard, my first suggestion is try to move away from a place of judgment, because the individual that you're trying to approach, if I'll use myself as an example, I hated myself. I was willing to die. Unfortunately, I had the best of intentions around my love for everybody. But if you got in the way of what I was desiring, you would be mowed over. And if you approached me incorrectly and I perceived it as from a judgmental stance or whatnot, I was immediately reactionary. So you want to be very cautious and you want to be careful on your delivery. And so that just starts with trying to find that segue to initiate the conversation, coming from a place of care and concern. And that could start with a simple statement. I love you. I'm here. Is there any way I can help you? Or, be careful about calling them out on too much. Be careful about not being part of their codependent landscape. So as a recovering addict, alcoholic, I'm looking for people to co-sign my BS. So you don't want to become part of the problem. And sometimes you can fall into that pitfall with the best of intentions initially. So it is a delicate balance. You want to start with some sort of delivery that's perceived as loving and caring and coming from an area of concern. You want to cite some examples, and then you talk about, is there any way that I can help you? And you also want to have a resource solution at your disposal that hopefully you can impart and bring into the conversation, so you can kind of move it quickly into potential solution. So that requires a bit of research and then thought. You want to not have expectations on the outcome of the conversation, because you can certainly control what you do or say, but you can't with the party that you're talking with. You want to try to stay away from judgmental. So if you're going in, you want to try to be like centered, not escalated over what they've just done. So be careful of delivery and timing, as I kind of talked about, but always have some tools in your toolbox, if you will, that as the situation progresses, you can hopefully try to move them quickly towards some semblance of a solution.
That's great. Thank you, Stacey, for that, and just some guidelines on the conversation. And just a note that on the calltimementalhealth.com website, not to overstate it, but there's a section called the Learning Center. And we've actually created two streams, one for individuals, so people who are themselves wanting to some help for themselves, but also wanting to support others, either family, friends, or coworkers. So there's an individual stream, and it has 4 modules on how to be a support to somebody related to mental health or addictions. And it actually has some coaching in there around how to have conversations and how to approach conversations. And there's also a stream for leaders and supervisors. And it has also modules related to how you can be an influence in the workplace, and also how you can have conversations with people and support people that are working for you and with you on set. So that's just another place that you can get a bit of learning on that. And so there's a good question. I think I might have said it during my earlier session. What is your opinion on using terms such as alcoholic? Do you think labels have negative consequences on someone who is in recovery from substance abuse? And just since I'm the one who said it, I think I forget the exact context I used that term. I did use it a little bit in the connotation of our stigma around substance use. And so was saying, you know, if I confess, are people going to think, you know, that's what I am? But I can also share from my own story that I do use that term in reference to myself still at times. I've had over 20 years of recovery now, so I identify myself now as somebody who's in recovery, because my identity is somebody who's working through and past my compulsive cycles that I had earlier, specific to substances. But I also, for myself, find it healthy to remember also that I am an alcoholic. And for me, that means that I cannot control the level to which I drink when I engage with alcohol. And so people have said to me over the years, well, it's been so long, couldn't you just go back socially, or, you know, make life, you know, more easier just to be social with people? And what I tell the people is that my life is just too simple right now to go back to that. You know, I used to have to decide how much and when and was it okay. And since I've made the choice just not to have a drink, then my life is easy, because I never have to make that decision. And so that term works for me okay in terms of how I self-identify. But I don't know your experience, Samantha and Stacey, just in terms of people's reaction to that word. And because we also, in that whole conversation about shame and how words matter, that we don't want to pinpoint people or judge people in just by applying a label to them without knowing them.
Yeah. It's a good question. I can certainly tell you, before I speak on my personal choice with vernacular, if you have someone that's in active addiction, most likely they're living in denial. So to face the truth of their affliction and the truth of their situation, they're consuming substances to avoid doing that. So to tackle them head on and label them an alcoholic in that scenario would probably not be a prudent strategy, because that, as I kind of talked about previously, they're looking for any excuse to run from the conversation. Those entering into recovery, however, it's a totally different story. So, I mean, as an alcoholic myself, I'm one bad decision from my past lifestyle. So prior to entering into recovery, I would have no conscious awareness that I was an alcoholic. I refused. I was an ostrich, metaphorically. Head was in the sand, digging my life further and further down a hole. And it wasn't until I was able to take a look at the unmanageability of my life and have some acceptance. And anyone that's familiar with 12 steps, that's part of step 1, step 2 in that area. And until I was willing to say I am an alcoholic, I wasn't truly moving into the solution. So we'll find, like anyone that's in recovery, talking about being an alcoholic or an addict is a natural thing. And it's actually part of a healthy recovery structure, in my opinion. But again, we have to be careful So it's like a two-pronged attack. The situation with individuals that you're looking at approaching and whatnot, you want to be careful. Certainly you want to break down the stigma, but you want to be careful about your approach using specific labels and whatnot. Eventually, God willing, they will ultimately get there and have some acceptance around things like that, but you want to be careful from the outset.
Great. That's perfect. Thank you so much for that. There's an interesting question here, a good one, just an honest question saying, can we talk about positive outcome from drugs? I've been unemployed for months now. I'm extremely angry, irritable, and impatient because I have no job. I just started a regimen of microdosing with psilocybin, and it is helping enormously. How do these kinds of drug use factor into this session? And just for those who aren't familiar with what that is, so that's a psychedelic substance found in many types of various types of mushrooms, and to kind of in the vernacular, magic mushrooms. And so that's a good question, right? And there's a lot of people now, a lot of celebrities talking about experimentations that are being done in terms of managing mental health with other psychedelics and LSD and other derivatives. And so I think it's a worthwhile conversation to weave into this. I think just from my part, because I'm also a counselor, a therapist, and work in the employee assistance world, before talking just about using that substance, because it's basically a form of self-medication, right? And so my recommendation to anyone is also knowing that there's different kinds of effects. There's positive effects and adverse effects that can come from using any drug. And so just to make sure how that, what those implications are for you. And I also recommend always people check with their family physician too on choices that they make, just to make sure it doesn't interact with anything else that they're currently taking potentially as a medication. And also I noticed you mentioning about just your emotional state, and I understand the challenges and the struggles with being unemployed, COVID, just the world news that we all get caught up in. So my encouragement to you is also to think about, why am I using this? And so what's the underlying factor? So why am I self-medicating? And what I found is that when we're not working, when we have emotional challenges and then start to use a substance to treat it, that can start to start a cycle of isolation. And so I like the quote that says that the opposite of addiction is connection, right? And so if you're feeling isolated, frustrated, and angry, my encouragement to you is just to also consider other kinds of supports and the social connections that you can build those, so that you have other ways that you're dealing with those anxieties, fears, and concerns that you're having. And if you do have access to extended health benefits, or if you're a member of one of the unions, each of the unions has an EAP program. And if you haven't thought about it, you may not know a specific issue, and we may not be able to solve you don't have a job right now, although career counseling is actually one of the options within your EAP program and supports. That just having a conversation with a friendly other person whose purpose is to be there to support you and help you think about ways that you can also manage some of these other emotions that are feeling really unpleasant to you at this time, and looking at other solutions too. So again, that's kind of a sidebar, because the other issue is something else. So do you have an opinion on that, Stacey?
It's a great question. So before I tackle that one head on, I'll say my own personal philosophy is abstinence-based recovery. That's the philosophy of Together We Can. There is obviously many methodologies out there. We've all heard the terms harm reduction and things along those lines. And frankly, with the epidemic we're dealing with, some of the lens is quite focused in that area. And there's a place, I think, for every methodology if we're trying to save people's lives. With regards to the specific question there, I will touch on isolation is the killer. So speaking personally, my addiction was trying to kill me. It was trying to put me in my own room with substances there, and everybody else was cast out of my life, predominantly due to my own behaviors, etc. And that was my addiction, or my alcoholism's happy place. Well, that's the normal world. Now I had COVID. So then we have further stressors. You've got unemployment. You've got like people that were on the edge, and then COVID hits, boom, they're falling into the abyss. So even further methodology around isolating, even further mortality, etc. When you talk about recovery, it is about attraction. It's about community. My own personal experience when I came in recovery, I was given my word back. That was something that was long removed from my life. And I built my entire recovery foundation around that. Whenever I said something, I followed through on it. There is currently experimentation with psychedelics. There is currently individuals out there that are trying to get it licensed under Health Canada. They're trying to bring it out from, I guess, black market into, common practice. There is currently a number of different studies with veterans with various different psychedelics to tackle PTSD, etc. So these are ongoing things, but kind of touching on what you mentioned, Greg, if you're not tackling the root problem, if you're currently unemployed and you're like isolating and you're like going down a conspiratorial, silo of conservatism or whatever it might be in that instance where people are being removed from your life and you're looking for something outside of yourself to cure you, at the end of the day, when that ends, you're going to be left with what you started with. So quite often, it's a personal choice, but if you're going to go down that road, I really strongly encourage you to research it carefully, to only do it under guidance of a medical professional. I'm not going to speak about outcomes on that. I can tell you that I do have some experience with, like, we deal with a lot of veterans, with a lot of case managers. There are a lot of case studies on that going on in the United States and whatnot, but it is not a commonly recognized practice at this time in Canada.
Greg, I have a question here that came up in the chat, but not in the Q&A, but maybe we have some time, like 17 more minutes. So I thought I could bring it forward to you guys. What are your views or opinions on AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, CBT, and Smart Recovery? Any comments on that?
You go ahead. Ladies first.
I was going to say, there's not one program one program isn't for everyone. So we have different resources out there. CBT is linked to all of those programs, and your counseling sessions, it is CBT focused. AA, whether you know it or not, is CBT focused. Smart Recovery is CBT focused. In a way, they're kind of all linked together in a weird fashion. And I think you have to find what's going to work best for you. Think of yourself and what you need and how you feel you're going to be able to move forward. But my opinion is that you need to find the one that works best for you. Together We Can is a 12-step based program, but we do offer Smart Recovery and other resources because we know that one model doesn't necessarily fit all. And so I think as long as you are working on bettering yourself and getting the help that you need, pick whichever one is going to be best for you.
Yeah, you can't put a square peg in a round hole. And my own personal experience with individuals coming into treatment, some have an automatic resistance to the concept of AA, and it could be derived from their own experiences or from their own surmising of what it might look like. And ultimately, if you have to meet somebody where they're at. So if you have an automatic barrier, you're really not going to proceed into solution. So ultimately, you have to look at all methodologies. And the more the merrier, in my personal opinion. So if it's not AA, maybe it's NA, Narcotics Anonymous. Maybe it's Smart Recovery. Maybe it's Life Ring. Maybe it's a combination of all of them. And being a seeker of knowledge and finding out what is best for you is very, very important in a journey of recovery. So if you're like being siloed in one area and you're resisting that really isn't ultimately the solution to what ails you. You need to open up your world and look at these various things. And this is something that we've discovered from just a practical operational perspective. And the same thing talks about how Together We Can is developed. For example, we have an LGBTQ program. So you have to be able to have a safe space where you can learn about recovery and get better. And if you're not feeling safe, you're really not going to go anywhere. We have an Indigenous program, a cultural specific, All My Relations. This is one of its kind as far as I'm concerned in Canada, very, very unique. We have a science-based approach, Solid Ground. So quite often we have profiles that are fairly well-to-do that have had an experience that puts them in a certain place, and they think their solution lies in a scientific journey of recovery. Okay, fill your boots. Here you go. If you're to put AA into that conversation, someone that's just pre-contemplative, they're sitting there thinking about something. If you're erecting a barrier, they're not moving into solution. So I guess to answer that question, the more diversified approach, the better. But as Samantha mentioned, CBT is thread through all that.
You want to add
Okay,
something?
that's great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
perfect. No, thanks, Stacey and Samantha for chipping in for that one. And I mean, that answers that question. Actually, there is one more question. I mean, people are inspired by this session, and actually, there is a question that's being answered right now live, probably. But if I'm a student right now and want to be part of this conversation and be involved, but not sure how to take action, would you have any areas or links through which we can participate?
Yeah, just as a starting point, depending on the school that you're in, that there are actually programs and awareness and anti-stigma programs available both in secondary and post-secondary schools. And there's also provincial programs for mental health across campuses, colleges across BC. And so I'd recommend getting connected to the counseling or guidance department at your school to find out, in particular in that setting, what kinds of campaigns and groups, because quite often they look for students to be ambassadors, mental health ambassadors towards other students, running information sessions and that. So my recommendation is to dig around there. Any opportunities or anyone that somebody just curious like this could speak to in your group, Stacey? And
certainly you can do send an email to the general TWC address. We'll gladly guide you accordingly. There is, as you mentioned, Stigma Free Society, who we've partnered with. We do often take many, many practicum students from a variety of different scholastically recognized organizations. I think at any given time, we have about 20 practicum students within our organization. There are service opportunities as well. If you join the family program, not only will you be able to heal yourself, but you'll be able to heal other family members. There are community events that are ongoing. So again, this is all part of how do we make a difference? And that can be some semblance of participation. That can be just talking about this. That can be leading another struggling individual to some sort of solution. That's can be giving them a pat on the back, telling somebody you love them. Like, I think a life well lived is recognized. How did we help? How did we help? And that can be small, it can be large, but it's typically an action of some kind.
That's great. So hopefully that gives you some ideas on how you can participate in supporting others. And I also know that I think it might be a good time, because we have room for a couple more questions if anyone wants to put them in the Q&A box. But also, Lori Ward, I was wondering if you wanted to join us again as well, just because you might have some thoughts too about, in particular, motion picture sector and this whole issue. Yeah,
thanks. Is my image right side up or am I sideways still?
You are good to go.
I'm good? Okay.
You're looking good. Now we lost you. There you are.
There we go. I'm struggling a bit. I'm working off my phone. My battery's dying. I got 2 monitors here. I'm supposed to be in bargaining, and I snuck away to do this, so don't tell anybody. I'm really passionate about that. I get such a kick out of Stacey, because if you could see him in his active addiction, you could see it by his passion for sobriety. So I just laugh every time he gets going, and he is a dear friend to me. I think for Calltime mental health, it was the stigma attached to mental health and addiction. And as much as we're doing as much as we can, and it's certainly come a long way with FSCAP and everything you've done, Greg, and including Actsafe. A big part of the issue that we haven't drilled down on in general is how do we end up so messed up after working in this industry? Because this industry is not kind. This industry is very long hours. It's very stressful. The work week shifts as the week shifts on. So there needs to be a lot of education that we will have to continue to work on the physical toll, the mental toll, the actual toll on your soul, and on your family and on your social life, whether you have a family or not. These things all tie into, I believe, into mental health and addiction. I've been in the film business since 1987. So, and Tom really got things rolling when at the council, I kept on saying, we got to do something. We got to do something. The fentanyl crisis really triggered it. But we really need to really examine how the film industry, if we don't manage it properly as individuals, because it's really up to the individual. A union or a boss really there's only so much anybody can do. As individuals, you have to really be able to check yourself, make sure you don't go too far, you don't stretch yourself out too much financially. You have to sometimes, or quite often, there's a ton of egos, and you have to check your ego too and say, is every promotion and every title worth the cost that I'm paying? So those that are young, I would say just look around at those that aren't young, and you can learn a lot from them and from their experiences, and both what's worked and what hasn't worked. So that's an area that I think we'll continue to have to work on. But I hope that makes some kind of sense. You cannot get by with 6 hours sleep or 5 hours sleep for a continuous period of time. If you're doing episodic television and you're driving from Langley one day to Horseshoe Bay the next day, and it all takes a toll. So if we can do more on trying to get ourselves before we cross that invisible line, which I'm very familiar with, I think that's another healthy approach. And I appreciate everything that was said. So I hope that makes some sense. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Laurie. And I mean, the issue of addiction is across all sectors, but this program and today is really about arts, entertainment, and about specific the motion picture sector. So it is important to hear from you and the concerns that you have and that people are experiencing in your sector in particular, and especially being able to turn down the level of stigma and to be able to create that openness. And so people like yourself and Tom and all the other members of the committee and there was a mention about the wristbands that Calltime Mental Health has had posters and wristbands available. And so if you're interested in kind of wearing one of those wristbands to promote the cause and the website, and or just to show yourself as somebody who's safe to talk to, if somebody's struggling and you can point them to the website, then you can talk to your steward or somebody from your union office, and they'll be able to get some of those wristbands to your production site or set. And
yeah, thanks, Greg. I'm sorry if I just add one more thing. Part of the thing we're trying to develop is, find that person that you feel you can confide in, and that's important, that you can confide confidentially with when you're on those long days and actually maybe a long period of time. And certainly that's part of the process. You're right with the wristbands, but and so it always, mental health and addiction, they're just tied. They're not, in my opinion, I'm not a professional, but that was the big part, is that you're not alone, and you have to be able to express yourself, and with the pressures of the job and the where you really feel like you have to suck it up all the time. If you don't have that ability to speak with somebody and build a self-check, then I think it's really important. Thanks.
No, great, thank you. And just on that, if in terms of other stories of people from the sector who have dealt with and faced their mental health challenges and addictions on the blog, the most recent post on the blog on the calltimementalhealth.com website is actually an interview that I did with a member of IATSE 891, a current active member who has dealt with and been through treatment for addiction, and wanted to share his story. And so Richard is somebody who's been part of a couple workshops with us before, and so he agreed to do recorded video of a short interview with him about his process and also his experience of working on set and the challenges that it's brought him, and also how he found support in his peers and on set when he went through some recent struggles, returning from COVID, getting back into the workplace with all the protocols and having some anxiety and challenges, and the support that he was able to access there. So if you want to kind of hear another personal testimony of somebody who's come through things and is now helping others, then that's a great place on the most recent blog post on the blog at calltimementalhealth.com. There was just one other comment, just going back to the terms around alcoholic and addict, because I think we've said them a couple more times in our round, and just the real just that idea that, you know, those people are also mothers, friends, actors, directors, teachers, doctors, and especially in this career, we want to use caution, they say, in labeling. And I think what I was saying, and also yourself, Stacey, is that that's how we often refer to ourselves once we've come to that place of acknowledgement, acceptance, and in self-identifying ourselves and kind of coming to terms with the reality of our addiction and compulsion. But I think we're all agreeing that we don't want to label from afar. Or just because somebody has a binge night doesn't mean that they're an alcoholic, or that they do have an addiction. It may be an individual experience or a one-time event. So we don't want to start labeling people. And I think coming back to that conversation of how to talk to people to support them, it's really all about caring about people, right? If you make your whole conversation not about, I've watched you and now I'm deciding what the problem area is and now I'm going to address it with you. Instead, you come to the person and just say, hey, you don't seem like yourself today. Or I'm wondering how you're doing. A lot's been going on with COVID and not having work, and I'm wondering what's happening for you right now. I just want you to know I care about you. And if you're ever having a challenge or a struggle, just know that I'm here to support you. I'm happy to listen. And if I can help you find a resource or a support, I'd be happy to do that. I think that's the open door where then people can self-identify the challenge they're having and then talk to you about it.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks for bringing that up. Sorry, we are just coming up with the end of this, so I would like to remind everybody that we have just 2 more minutes, so we would like to wrap it up. But thanks for sharing your points, and again, Greg, Stacey, and Samantha, please reach out to them if they can always answer in the chat too. But I just wanted to thank you all for sharing your stories, your personal information, like successes in that. Stacey, congratulations, 15 years sober. That's a great story to share, and be inspiring all of us here. So thanks very much for that. And please don't forget to complete a short exit poll, which is up on your screen now. Aiden, if you can please bring up the exit poll as we wrap this session up. I wanted to thank you again, Laurie, Tom, Greg, Stacey, and Samantha for joining us for this wonderful session. This session has been recorded, which means it will be available if you have subscribed to our conference email subscription. You will be able to access this further. And there are lots of resources that has been shared. Calltimementalhealth.com is the site that you all can look forward to. And before I also end, I just want to remind everybody that the next session will be starting in 30 more minutes. So this is your time for stretch break, and the stretch break is sponsored by UBCP ACTRA. So please do get up and walk around at our trade show floor too. So go around and a virtual trade show floor and chat with them, and please join us in our next session, which is in 30 minutes. And don't forget our conference social event today evening, where you could win a Google HomePod, a 43-inch smart TV, or a Canon camera kit at our social bingo night. Can you imagine? So please do join for all of for that social event too. More in our trade show floor that's coming up. So thank you once again, everybody, and thank you to all our speakers. Thank you very much. That was a very informative session. Thank you.